Insurance fraud in the UK costs more than £1.2 billion a year. That's more than £3 million a day. Deliberate crashes, bogus personal injuries, even phantom pets. The fraudsters are risking more and more to make a quick killing, and every year it's adding more than £50 to your insurance bill. But insurers are fighting back, exposing a fraudulent claim every 5 minutes. Armed with the latest fraud-busting technology, including covert surveillance systems, sophisticated data analysis techniques, and specially trained fraud investigators, they're catching these chancers red-handed. Instead of getting away with it, more and more of these fraudsters are being caught out and claimed and shamed. Here on Claimed and Shamed, we've seen countless bogus insurance claims that have made our toes curl, with some particularly notorious cases standing out. This could be down to the sheer financial scale of the fraud involved, or because of the downright cheek of the claimants. Today, we've dug deep into the archives to bring you some of our most shocking stories. Coming up, as low as it gets, the heartless woman who tried to profit from tragedies like the Grenfell Tower fire.
One of the most devious insurance fraudsters that I have come across in my 20 years of working in insurance fraud.
The brazen conman who forgets which side his fake injury is on.
He was trying to pull the wool over our eyes.
And the story of the woman whose arson-for-cash scheme went horribly wrong, with her child tragically paying the price.
This is a case where a mother's greed or desire for a quick cash grab ends up in the death of her son.
But first, we're jetting off to sunnier climes. The last thing anyone wants on a much-anticipated family holiday is a spanner in the works. Whilst it's hard to put a price on the disappointment of a ruined break, if things do go wrong, legal firms like Horwich Farrelly are there to make sure only the genuine cases are paid out.
We were instructed to investigate a number of claims that were brought by a family after a stay in a hotel based in Turkey.
The claim forms told of the kind of holiday nightmare we all dread.
They'd suffered from a bout of food poisoning for a number of days because of the food and drink that they consumed in the hotel.
Not ideal, and it sounds extremely unpleasant.
All of the claimants put forward claims for pretty significant symptoms. The two adults claimed that they were bed-bound and had soiled the bed, and the children had done the same in the pool as well. Because of the severity of the symptoms that the claimants were saying they suffered from, the claims were potentially worth tens of thousands of pounds. The claim itself, when it was presented to the tour operator, wasn't particularly unusual, and the fact that they had been to a doctor made it potentially even more credible.
Any illness like this can test your dignity, but suspicions were aroused by loose chat over cocktails.
During the claimant's stay at the hotel, some of the guests had overheard them at the bar claiming that they were going to bring claims for compensation when they returned to the UK and had done so before in the past.
Holidaymakers with form, not what any hotel wants to experience.
This raised alarm bells for the hotel, so the hotel started investigations before the claims were presented. The management made the staff aware of these particular claimants and made sure that all CCTV footage was stored and kept safely in the event that the claims were presented in the future.
Once the claim came in, the insurers appointed Horwich Farrelly to look into the case. Its first line of inquiry was the hotel, which turned over some explosive evidence.
CCTV footage. At the time the claimants were apparently bed-bound. Father was dancing by the pool and apparently had no ill symptoms whatsoever.
He's clearly throwing shapes, not throwing up. Hardly the actions of a man who can barely leave the bathroom. And the whole family is seen leaving their room to go on a trip. And if they were incapable of venturing out, then why are they spotted returning? Whilst the evidence offered a compelling case against the claim, investigators wanted to carry out further investigations back home. So they went online.
We discovered that one of the claimants had actually posted on his return back to the UK to say what a fantastic holiday he had. We found one post that showed the two of the claimants out. One of the claimants actually had a parrot on his shoulder and apparently suffering from no ill effects whatsoever.
This photo, along with the CCTV footage, was all the evidence David needed.
We presented all of this evidence to the claimants, and initially they disputed it, but we were confident that we had enough to take matters further, to sue them for damages and costs, and to also pursue a declaration that the claimants were presenting fraudulent claims. The claims presented could have cost the tour operator and potentially the hotel tens of thousands of pounds, so it was really, really important that we investigated the claims thoroughly, and when we found that evidence of dishonesty, that we made an example of these claimants.
When the case went to court in Manchester, the doctor and staff from the hotel gave testimony that the couple hadn't been ill. After weighing up the evidence, the judge convicted the holidaymakers of conspiracy to commit fraud and ordered them to pay the travel company almost £30,000 in costs. Whilst this was a great outcome for David, unfortunately, it was also the type of claim that was becoming familiar.
At the time these claims were presented, it had been reported that there had been a 500% increase in holiday sickness claims, so it was extremely important for us to tackle that problem.
We now turn our attention to the United States and one of the most shocking cases we've ever come across on Claimed and Shamed. Insurance fraud is a huge problem in the States, costing an astonishing $40 billion a year. But when individuals are willing to go to extreme lengths to get a payout, things can go horribly wrong, as in our next case, which features the tragic death of a child.
This is a case where a mother's greed or desire for a quick cash grab ends up in the death of her son.
Andrews in South Carolina is a small neighbourly town situated close to the Black River. With just 3,000 residents, it's a close-knit community.
People are born in Andrews, they live in Andrews, they die in Andrews. It's that type of community.
Alex Lang is a true crime reporter and recalls a tragic event that shook Andrews to its core. The 28th of March 2014 was definitely a busy Friday for one local mother, as she and her family were moving home.
Marissa Cohen decides to move out of her trailer with her kids. They're going to move into a nearby apartment there in Andrews, South Carolina. The move goes fine. They leave a few things behind in the trailer, a few boxes, odds and ends.
Not only was she doing the big move, but one of her children, 12-year-old David Science, was going off to a birthday party at the local recreation centre.
David Coombs is Marissa Cohen's son. His full name is David Science Coombs. Your typical American boy, running around, going to class, not getting into trouble at that age, waiting to grow up, really. He had friends there, several friends, some lived close by.
Like Science's friend Ricky, the plan was that after the party, he would stay at Ricky's home.
So around 11 p.m., Science decides to leave the birthday party at the rec center. He goes over to the friend's house, lives nearby his mobile home that he's moved out of that day.
The timing for the family's move couldn't have been more fortunate, because in the early hours of March the 29th, at 1:27 in the morning, Marissa Cohen's trailer catches fire. By the time the firefighters arrive, the trailer is fully alight. It's not until they've put the fire out that they make a gruesome discovery.
They find the body of a young boy. He's laying in the floor. There's some space heaters around.
It's 12-year-old David Science, Marissa Cohen's son, who was supposed to be staying nearby with his friend.
Why at the friend's house, Science mentioned something like, hey, I'm just going to run home. I think the plan was to get some clothes he left behind, to change for the next morning. His friend says, okay, I'll see you in a minute. And Science never returns.
It was an utter tragedy. Had Science given the party a miss or stayed over at his friend's house, the 12-year-old would still be alive. Not long after the fire had been put out, his mother, Marissa Cohen, arrived at the scene. But her response wasn't what officers expected.
It seemed very cold when right outside where her child died. It's not a crying, it's not an inconsolable type person like you would expect.
It could have been the shock. Yet when helping officers with their inquiries at the station, investigators felt something was up.
Right, where you living now? So I know you were at the project. Is that where you're living for the time being?
That's where I'm at.
And also your other two children stay there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what's their names?
Dave, I'm sorry, Dave was there. Devon, and Marissa.
Remember, this was only a few hours after Marissa had discovered that her 12-year-old son had died in the fire. The last time she saw him, he was going off to a party.
They played and everything, and then Science said, he mentioned about the party again. So I told him he was allowed to go, but he had to come back to the project, and he said, okay.
What time was that party supposed to end?
11 o'clock.
And he was supposed to come back to the project?
Yes.
Okay, that's my understanding that this fire started around 1:30. Did you try to call him anytime between 11
Well, I
and
tried to call him about 9-something,
Okay.
but it kept going to voicemail.
Okay, I did you try to call him anytime after that?
No, I felt it.
Now, as far as the house, how many people have keys?
Everybody.
Okay, so Dave had a key.
As investigator Garrett probed further, Marissa Cohen gave a possible explanation for the tragic trailer fire.
You actually moved out yesterday, and what's the reason?
Because they had electrical problems.
Now, yesterday being Friday,
Mm-hmm.
was the day you moved out.
Right.
Okay, when did the electrical problem start?
Well, it started about 2 months ago.
So sometime in January. So you got it fixed, and then when did it blow out again? About.
About a month later.
Things like simple electrical sparks will catch an entire trailer on fire. Trailers in this area are the lower end of quality of mobile homes. By the time the fire department gets there, it's already spread and the trailer's totaled.
On further investigation, police talked to witnesses who seemed to verify Marissa's story.
About a week before moving out of the trailer, Marissa told some friends that the trailer had some electrical problems.
Initially, Cohen's account seemed plausible, until police discovered some very suspect information. 1 month before the family moved out of the trailer, Cohen had taken out a home insurance policy.
For about $25,000. Pretty low amount, but for a mobile home in that area, it's about fair.
With money as a motive, Cohen is now looking like a likely suspect for what could have been foul play. Then investigators receive an anonymous tip-off.
Somebody tells them that Marissa Cohen has bought kerosene shortly before this fire.
On the morning of the blaze, Cohen stopped by a local store and picked up what was effectively fuel. However, on the night of the incident, Cohen seemed to have an alibi. She was in her new apartment. Detectives still suspected foul play and decided to check her mobile phone records. The day before her trailer went up in smoke, Cohen had made multiple calls to a man named Randy Collins. Detective Garrett called him in for questioning, and after hours of interviewing, Collins revealed the whole thing had been planned by Cohen.
She came by my house and she said, I got something I need you to do for me. And I said, what do you need for me to do? I need you to burn the house, this house. She said, I give you 5,000.
What did she say she needed you to do?
She want me to burn the house. But I said I ain't gonna do it.
So she told you that?
Yeah, she told me that.
$5,000 to burn that trailer down.
That's right.
And says, hey, I need you to burn down a trailer. I give you $5,000 for it.
Yeah.
A payment she would only be able to afford after her insurance money of $25,000 had come through. Randy Collins claims that at that point he told Cohen he wouldn't do it. But then he has a conversation with his relative, James Miller.
I tell it to my nephew James. I said, I ain't doing that.
And your
No,
nephew
sir.
is James?
Yeah, I talked to James, and then he said, I might do that.
You hook up with James, you say, hey, look, I just talked with Tina, who is Marissa Cohen.
Yes, I did.
And says, look, she's offering $5,000 to burn down his trailer.
Yes.
James is like, yeah, I can use some yams. You're like, hey, look, times is rough. I mean, it's just a trailer. Now we get to the day of the fire.
Friday, the 28th of March, the day Cohen moves the last of her possessions out of the trailer. She then puts her money-making scheme into action.
Marissa went and bought $20 worth of kerosene. We got that. We got that on video.
You know, I'm just trying to figure out what Marissa did with the $20 worth of kerosene. What was she supposed to do in reference to the kerosene?
She said she'd have the kerosene in the house. That's what she had said.
Did she tell you where she was going to put the kerosene in the house?
Near the back room, she could have it in the back.
So she said, hey, I got the kerosene. I'm going to leave it in this room, the back room. I'm going to leave the back door open.
That night, witnesses see a vehicle with two men in the area. The lure of $5,000 must have been too much for Randy Collins, who is there with his nephew James. The trailer should have been open, but when they arrive, the door is locked. 12-year-old Science had come back to the trailer and locked the door after himself.
You get out and walk through the path,
Right.
you walk around. And you see no door been open.
He's right, there was no door open. Because what happened was Science went in and locked the door. That's why there was no door open. So y'all both standing right here in front of the trailer.
I said, Jen, don't do that, John. I said, don't do that.
Why'd you say that? I mean, it's $5,000.
I ain't care about that. I tell her, let's don't do that.
You already knew y'all were going over there to do it because y'all went out of your way to go over there.
And all I see him throw up match in the window, and then we leave.
Moments later, the trailer burnt to the ground, leaving Marissa Cohen free to claim the $25,000 insurance payout. Inside was her son, 12-year-old David Science. James Miller, the nephew, was interviewed but never charged, leaving Collins and Cohen to pay the price.
They were charged with several crimes. The big ones were arson in the first degree. It's first degree with a death. That's a pretty rare charge here. They were also charged with conspiracy for the plan to burn down the trailer.
In another tragic twist, while waiting for Randy and Marissa to stand trial, Science's older brother, Devon, decided James Miller should also pay. He took a gun and shot Miller dead. A crime that would see him sentenced to 16 years. It was also time for a jury to decide the fate of Collins and Cohen.
At trial, Randy Collins was found guilty. He was sentenced to a total of 30 years in prison. Marissa Cohen went to trial a year later. She was found guilty of the first-degree arson and sentenced to 35 years.
In addition, she also received 5 years for conspiracy and 10 years for child neglect. Marissa Cohen was sentenced to a total of 50 years.
They didn't plan to burn it down with him in it. They didn't burn it down going, oh, the kid's inside, we don't care. She probably saw it as a cash grab, right? I'm moving out of this trailer, I can burn it down, I don't have a lot of money. There's certainly a greed element involved.
Later, a cosmetic surgeon abuses his position to make millions of dollars out of medical health insurance scams. A change of gear now, as we come to the case of a brazen scaffolder who hugely exaggerated a claim to the value of almost £1 million, one of the biggest we've ever seen on Claimed and Shamed. What started out as a genuine accident at work ended with the fraud detectives hot on this chance's heels. Employers have a duty of care, and there's insurance in place to help those affected. But as insurer QBE found, it's vital to check and double-check claims, as not all those making them are honest.
Initially, we were told by our insured that an accident had occurred involving one of the employees and that he'd fallen 40 feet from scaffolding to the ground and then into a pit 6 feet below.
This sounds horrific.
Sustained some quite significant injuries, including broken shoulder blade, broken arm, had a heart attack at the scene, and also broken spine.
The employee was very lucky to have survived at all.
The first tangible evidence we received were by way of GP records, almost 2 years after the incident occurred. This identified that he had sustained some quite significant injuries, but we also noticed that he'd been involved in a road traffic accident shortly after our incident.
This was one unlucky man, but the car crash did raise some questions about his work accident.
It appears that he was telling the insurer dealing with the road traffic accident that he was fine and perfectly fit before their accident occurred, but to us he was telling us that he'd been constantly injured following the incident that occurred before the road traffic accident. That immediately made us have concerns that he wasn't telling us the full truth about how he was incapacitated following the accident. We tried to gather additional evidence so we can fully understand the extent of his injuries. All we managed to get after 3 years were GP records. When we received a schedule of loss from him, he was after in the region of £300,000 purely for the physical injuries and in the region of £650,000 for any additional losses.
Given the extent of his injuries and incapacity, the claim for almost £1 million was probably fair. But given QBE's doubts about how truthful he was being, the company was wary and set up its own medical checks with him.
When we presented to our medical experts, he presented with a much higher level of disability, including the need of a crutch, being unable to wash and dress, unable to make a hot cup of coffee due to dizziness and lethargy. He was actually saying that he was worse than he was when he'd seen his own medical experts. So this again to us was another factor which indicated that he might not be telling the truth. So the next step for us was to undertake profiling and surveillance of the claimant.
The claimant had said he needed to use a crutch and was incapable of making a cup of coffee. But the evidence seemed to present otherwise.
What we actually saw was somebody who seemed to be going about his daily activities without any difficulties whatsoever. He was working, socialising and shopping. The surveillance we had showed us him walking for a number of hours along the beach. We also had him working up a ladder, fitting a sign to a shop. And when he went to see our medical experts, he brought a crutch out and had his partner helping him get out of the car. It wasn't until he got to the other side of the road that she had to tell him that he was using the wrong hand, and he switched hands with the crutch, which again was a bit of a flag for us.
Just a bit.
There was some definitely conscious exaggeration here, that he was trying to pull the wool over our eyes.
The mountain of surveillance footage was all the proof Ben needed.
Eventually, with the weight of evidence we had, we disclosed it to his solicitors, and they decided that he wasn't somebody they wanted to represent, so they left him to be a claimant in person.
The claimant was on his own.
4 years after the original incident, he tried his best efforts to have our evidence thrown out, which indicated he had been fraudulent.
But QBE fought back.
We decided to pursue Mr. Jones for a private prosecution for attempted fraud. So 7 years after the original incident, we were in the criminal court, and Mr. Jones was found guilty of attempted fraud and sentenced to 2 years, suspended for 2 years.
Hoping to walk away with close to £1 million, Liam Jones instead landed himself with a criminal record for attempted fraud.
The judge said to Mr. Jones that fraud like this is not a victimless crime and that it affects the public at large.
The woman in our next case really was the lowest of the low, even in our rogues gallery of insurance cheats. This fraudster had no qualms about exploiting terrible tragedies to dishonestly claim hundreds of thousands of pounds. She took advantage of horrific events, including the Grenfell Tower fire, the Manchester Arena bombing, and the terror attack at London Bridge, purely for her own financial gain. The insurance world's hardened investigators have seen it all, but this next story shocked even them. A woman claiming to be present at 3 tragic events which took place in 2017 lodged fraudulent insurance claims with 3 insurers. Those who had dealings with her describe her as a real piece of work.
One of the most devious insurance fraudsters that I have come across in my 20 years of working in insurance fraud.
She presented claims close to £200,000.
Pure greed, as simple as that.
Towards the end of 2016, the insurer Legal & General made a discovery that would turn out to be just the beginning of this woman's fraudulent claims.
One of our investigators was talking to a customer about how they had run out of fuel, parked the car up on the side of the motorway, walked to the nearest petrol station. The vehicle had been broken into, a bag containing valuable items had been taken. Theft from a vehicle is usually remote. At the side of a motorway where a vehicle's broken down, not a very common scenario. Some weeks later, another claim was presented by a different customer that had very, very similar circumstances. One of our senior investigators overheard both the investigators talking about their cases, put 2 and 2 together and thought, we need to look at these side by side and see if there's any similarities. The types of losses were very similar. Designer clothing, designer bags, purses, sunglasses. We even had one instance of a small ingot of gold being taken. The items didn't exist. The receipts were being manufactured, repeatedly used.
What Legal & General would later realise is it had stumbled on the tip of the iceberg. Because at another insurance company, RSA, alarm bells over very similar sounding claims had been ringing since 2014.
Initially, one claim was flagged to RSA for investigation as a result of the social network analysis tool. As soon as we opened up the network, we could see probably around about 5 or 6 other claims, and it was then that we saw that there was false information, a plethora of false details.
Whoever was behind these had gone to great lengths to evade detection by creating multiple fake names, addresses, and even borrowing innocent people's identities to file multiple claims.
All of the data was false, all of the data was different, but what was critical is an insurance fraudster wants only one thing, and that is to be paid. And the only way to be paid is to provide us with your bank account information.
There was more than one bank account used, but enough data matches were found to be able to link 17 claims back to a single suspect.
It was at that point that we knew we were dealing with a prolific insurance fraudster.
Insurer Legal & General was also finding strong connections between claims.
Some telephone numbers matched across different policies and claims. Every time we said, let's have a look for that telephone number, or let's have a look for that email address, we were finding yet another case. And once we completed our investigation, we had a network of 27 different policies, and seemingly one person having 27 different aliases.
Determined to catch out the woman behind all these claims, Legal & General came up with a plan.
One of our investigators has an innate ability to recognise cases, circumstances, names, in some cases even sort of telephone numbers or email addresses that he has seen previously. A human algorithm. It made sense for us to ensure that any further cases that were presented were investigated and dealt with by him.
While Legal & General was directing calls from the suspect onto its top investigator, RSA had passed on its evidence to a body called the Insurance Fraud Bureau, which holds information from across the industry.
We have access to over 143 million records, and we use the information that's contained in our databases to identify trends and patterns of activity, and also follow up on leads we receive from insurers.
Perfectly placed then to analyse the information received from RSA regarding the prolific suspect. The originator of this web of deceit was identified as Roxana Ashraf from Edinburgh.
We identified additional claims with other insurers and new identities and new aliases that Ashraf was using.
She was arrested and questioned, but she answered no comment to all interview questions and was released on bail pending further investigation.
Despite being arrested and subsequently bailed, she continued her behaviour, continued to make claims.
By now, it had been discovered that insurer Aviva had also been targeted by Ashraf, so it joined Legal & General and RSA in the big investigation. And a pattern of behaviour was emerging.
Invariably, there was some element of distress, be that we broke down, we had to walk to a petrol station, or somebody has fallen, she had fallen and injured herself, and during the confusion, a bag had been lost, or an item of jewellery had been lost. There was always an element of distress in the claim, in the circumstance that had happened, which naturally would lead you as a person listening to that claim to have sympathy for that individual.
As the evidence mounted, police went to re-arrest Ashraf in 2017.
As a result of the information that we provided to the police, a number of additional addresses were identified, and at one of these, Ashraf was found hiding behind a locked door in a bedroom.
She appeared to be trying to hide items in that room. A search was conducted, and material relating to a raft of fake claims was uncovered. But amongst this paperwork, officers found evidence of troubling and previously undiscovered claims. In claims made to RSA, Ashraf firstly maintained she was in Manchester on the 22nd of May 2017.
Right in the middle of the Manchester bombing event at the Ariana Grande concert.
Thousands of people were desperately trying to get out of a smoke-filled building, so it's not surprising that items were left in the panic. As the news of the tragic events of that night sank in around the country, audacious Ashraf saw it as an opportunity to put in a fake claim and a substantial one.
She lost a designer handbag, a designer pair of sunglasses, a few £1,000s and a large amount of jewellery.
Even for a fraudster, this was an exceptionally low move. But she didn't stop there. A couple of weeks later, terrorists targeted London Bridge, leaving 8 dead and many injured. Unbelievably, Ashraf was counting herself amongst those affected.
She had the same designer handbag, the same sunglasses, the same jewellery and a large amount of cash on her.
Just 11 days later, a claim was made for the same list of items, but they'd been lost in a fire at Grenfell Tower.
That somebody could sink to that level and to exploit the victims and the families of the victims of that tragedy in order to make a personal gain of a few £100 effectively, that was quite shocking.
It revealed a monumental lack of empathy. No event, however heartbreaking, was off limits to Ashraf's opportunistic greed. Finally, when it came to the trial, the full extent of her deceit was revealed.
In total, Rukhsana Ashraf took out 70 fraudulent policies. She made 50 fraudulent insurance claims with a total reserve of £179,000, and she was paid out ultimately £50,000 before she was caught.
People that are prepared to commit fraud with that level of determination inevitably will be successful at some point, but they've got to be successful every time. We only need to catch them once.
Rukhsana Ashraf was found guilty of fraud by false representation and money laundering offences. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison.
The fact that somebody would sink to those depths to exploit those events for their own personal gain was truly shocking.
This individual played on the heartstrings, and she notified all of her claims online, so she didn't even have to speak to anybody. And we are very pleased as RSA to see that she is now languishing in prison.
As we know on Claimed and Shamed, there's no such thing as a typical insurance fraudster. They come from all walks of life and are often motivated by one thing: greed. This next case takes us back to the United States and the shocking story of a cosmetic surgeon who carried out unnecessary procedures on unsuspecting patients just so he could claim tens of millions of dollars back from their health insurance policies. The United States has a very different healthcare system to ours. There, millions of people rely on insurance to cover medical issues. But in Rancho Mirage, California, one practice has been violating guidelines. Millions of dollars have been siphoned off, and some patients have endured unnecessary and substandard surgery, leading to life-changing injuries. All to line the pockets of a man whose greed knew no bounds, according to a judge. David Morrow, a cosmetic surgeon and dermatologist, was the owner of the Morrow Institute. A successful doctor, he owned multiple million-dollar homes. Funding this luxurious lifestyle came at the expense of his patients, who he pressured to undergo procedures and treatments they didn't need, so they could be billed to insurance. Over 5 years, Dr. Morrow claimed millions of dollars for procedures he certified as medically necessary. But in reality, what had been carried out were cosmetic procedures like tummy tucks and nose jobs. He doctored medical records to hide the cosmetic nature of the procedures by handwriting over the original text. Here, the words umbilical and ventral hernias have covered the original text, which said abdominoplasty. These procedures would have received a medical insurance payout, but the abdominoplasty, which is a tummy tuck, would not. He also tampered with documents, inserting blank white boxes to conceal the cosmetic procedures he was billing for. Morrow blatantly used his clients, faking testimonials. This was rejected outright by the angry patient. 10 patients suffered injury as a result of Morrow's offences. Some were actually disfigured, and some had procedures performed without them giving consent. One woman wasn't told prior to surgery that she was to have a piece of cartilage removed from her ear to her nose. Now, she can no longer blow her nose normally. Another victim was left with a virus which left a hole in her stomach, which took 4 months to recover. A man had to go back into the Morrow Institute to have his nose flap glued back on. Morrow's was an abuse of trust on a massive scale. At least 7 insurance companies were affected by the sheer scale of Morrow's actions. Morrow and the Institute submitted more than $80 million of claims, and insurance companies made payments of more than $20 million to him and the clinic. The doctor also failed to report more than $1.5 million on his tax returns. But his spree was not to last. His criminal activity spanned from at least 2007 until March 2011, when there was a search of his premises and hard drives by the FBI and the California Department of Insurance. This led to a 5-year investigation. 90 witnesses were interviewed. Morrow pleaded guilty in March 2016, but instead of facing the music, he fled the country in spring 2017. Before he disappeared, he managed to sell his Beverly Hills home for more than $9.5 million and conceal the sale. In his absence, he was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. He's since been discovered in Israel and has been extradited to the United States, where he's now serving his sentence. The judge said he showed an utter disregard for patients' well-being and safety. Victim, Michelle B., put it best in her written victim impact statement to the court.
David Morrow is a money-hungry, pride-filled, unprincipled man with no concern for the welfare of other human beings, and has taken advantage of hundreds of women in his singular goal of gaining wealth.
For the victims, it's likely no punishment could go far enough, but David Morrow's medical license has been revoked. They'll be relieved he can no longer practice. Another shocking case of deception, and a timely reminder that we all need to remain vigilant to the scourge of insurance fraud. From chancers exaggerating injury to criminal gangs engineering crashes for cash, these tricksters hit us all in the pocket. Every year, insurers lose millions to these scams, and it's you, the policyholder, who ends up paying the price in hikes to your premiums. But the sheer number of thieves caught in the act sends a clear message to anyone thinking about cheating the system. They claimed, but now they're shamed.